My pre-recorded presentation was about 23 minutes or so I'm going to give you like a brief presentation of what I already said in that pre-recorded presentation, a brief summary of the argument or the main arguments of my presentation. So my presentation is titled Fear of Death as the Foundation of Modern Political Philosophy and its Overcoming by Transhumanism. So transhumanism is a recent philosophical phenomenon that consists on the attempt to overcome the natural condition of the human being through technology. This could be like a summarized, brief definition of transhumanism. The result of the transhumanist project would be a new condition beyond the human one, the transhuman condition. For the same reason, transhumanism can be considered as a form of post-humanism in which the human condition would become obsolete. Although the transhumanist movement has different phases and pursues different objectives, one of the most classic and common is the search for a longer and even eternal life through the overcoming of aging, disease, and finally death. I believe that to understand transhumanism, it is necessary to go back in history. Of course, ancient history, especially Aristotle, could illuminate many of the problems present in the transhumanist discussion. However, today I want to refer to another moment in our Western history, the beginning of modernity. Although the change from the ancient medieval world to the modern world cannot be identified with a single moment or a specific event, it is possible to determine the influence of some authors as founders of modern political thought. If some authors point to Descartes or Bacon, I want to refer rather to the beginning of modern political philosophy specifically. It seems to me that it is possible to identify between Machiavelli and Hobbes the two main authors in charge of making the change from medieval to modern political thought. In the case of Machiavelli, I believe that he is at the hinge between these two worlds with one foot on each side, or if you like, without properly belonging either to the ancient medieval world and neither to the modern political thought. Machiavelli, therefore, would be probably a Renaissance political philosophy, the author of series of insights that would later shape our modern politics. Precisely Hobbes, during the following century after Machiavelli, would be in charge of structuring and developing the foundations of modern political philosophy. Both authors have some elements in common, such as their important anthropological premises. Today I want to refer especially to the idea that the Florentine and the British share, and that is that fear is a fundamental passion in the life of the human being, and this is the foundation of their political organization. To understand the importance of fear and the novelty that Machiavelli and Hobbes bring on this point with respect to the classics, it is necessary with respect to teleology. Therefore, before reviewing the role of fear in Machiavelli and Hobbes, it will be necessary to refer briefly to what Robert Spemann, a German philosopher, called the teleological inversion of modernity. Once we have understood what this teleological inversion consists of, we can clearly understand the role of fear of death in the foundation of modern political philosophy. Only after reviewing these two elements, it is possible to understand what transhumanism is trying to do to overcome death, aging, and illness. And finally, we will outline some possible logical consequences if the transhumanist project is partially or totally successful. So first of all, the twist of modernity, the teleological inversion. The French philosopher Olivier Rey, in his book on transhumanism, refers to a concept coined by Robert Spemann that is fundamental in understanding the primacy of survival that we observe on modernity. And this primacy of survival, I refer that we are, first of all, preoccupied on surviving, okay, of being alive, rather than understanding what type of life or in what sense or with what aim or what telos we are going to live to. So Oliver Ray lucidly explains that the ancients understood self-preservation as a condition of possibility to be able to develop a life whose ultimate goal was happiness, virtue, or the good life. The moderns, on the other hand, seem to have inverted this logic in what Spemann calls the teleological inversion. In short, this concept identified by the German philosopher consists in the fact that, I quote, self-preservation, instead of being at the service of what deserves to be preserved, becomes the ultimate end to which everything else is subordinated. End of quote. Preservation of life then becomes the telos, the very end of all forms of life. We will see later that this turn appears very clearly in the background of Hobbes' state of nature and social contract. However, as I said, self-preservation of life is not limited to individuals or human beings. Once the theory of evolution of species makes its appearance, Darwinism applies the same principle to the species as a whole in trying to survive. In other words, every living organism would exist simply to try to ensure the survival of the species rather than the individual. And finally, with the developments of genetics, we reach a final step. It would be then genes that would be trying to survive. Life would then ultimately be the attempt of the famous Dawkins selfish genes to achieve survival. Although there are multiple reasons and arguments to criticize this teleological inversion, especially the way in which it has been applied to individuals, species, and genes, for now we'll settle for showing it. This is the main idea. There is a teleological inversion in modernity. Thus, if we believe that Spemann's thesis on teleological inversion is acceptable, it will be time to specially observe the manifestation that it has in modern political philosophy. So let's turn to Machiavelli and Hobbes at the beginnings of, or the foundations of modern political philosophy. As we have said, the beginning of modern political philosophy is usually set between Machiavelli and Hobbes, although there is greater consensus that the British is a modern than with the Florentine. In fact, the author of The Prince himself is explicit in the distance that exists between him and his predecessors. Beyond locating the beginning of political modernity in Hobbes or Machiavelli, it is possible to establish some common ground between them. For example, both seem to have a political anthropology that views human beings as selfish and dangerous to each other. In this sense, one of the central concepts for both authors will be fear, and especially in Hobbes, fear of death. Corey Robin, in his work titled Fear, has demonstrated the importance of fear as a concept in the history of political ideas. The author, as we know, chooses four main authors to show the centrality of fear in political philosophy: Hobbes, Montesquieu, Tocqueville, and Hannah Arendt. It is by no chance, therefore, that fear is a central element only in modernity. We can notice that he doesn't choose any medieval or ancient philosopher, only moderns. Machiavelli, although he is not one of the four central characters mentioned on Corey Robin's book, is mentioned on several occasions. Furthermore, we know that the Florentine exerts a great influence on some of these authors of Corey Robin's book, as Montesquieu. So in the following minutes, I will briefly show the central role of fear on the political philosophy of both Machiavelli and Hobbes. The work of Machiavelli is one of the more complex to synthesize and harmonize, since it doesn't have any systematic character and has different styles and objects. However, there is no doubt that one of his central ideas is the famous theory of humors. In short, this theory of Machiavelli sustains that every city is constituted by two different humors and that they are opposed, one of the nobles and the other of the people. This configuration supposes, as Claude Lefort points out, a radical tearing of society into two parts. Each humor is defined as a wish, and one is directly opposed to the other. The humor of the nobles is usually referred to as a desire to dominate, while the people's humor simply wishes that they were not dominated. However, a careful look at the discourses on Livy shows us that Machiavelli also presents the humor of the people as those who wish to acquire what they don't have, while the nobles would simply wish to keep what is already acquired. From this perspective, it would be the people who would have a more active or offensive humor, while the great ones would be in a more defensive position. This tension between the two ways of understanding each humor can be explained from a passion that seems to explain them in totality, and this one is fear. It is possible, therefore, to perceive that the experience of fear is at the base of the theory of the humors and of Machiavellian political philosophy. This is what Leo Strauss called the primacy of terror in Machiavelli's thought. This fear, while it can take many forms, such as fear of punishment, revenge, or the unknown, is ultimately as explicitly as Hobbes' the centrality of death in the experience of fear, it is unquestionably at the bottom of his entire description of the fear of both nobles and the people. For the Florentine, fear produces a natural desire for security that is present in all the persons, and it would be the desire that would provoke the desire in the humors. People ultimately would find themselves in a condition of vulnerability and insecurity that cannot be eliminated. The best example of this situation is found in the chapter dedicated to political conspiracy in the Discourses on Livy, where we can see that every person can reach the prince and murder him. So the prince is in a vulnerable position, although he has the power. There, Machiavelli anticipates the logic of the Hobbesian state of nature. In sum, the fear of death and the search for security play a fundamental role in Machiavelli's work and explain his theory of the humors. Hobbes, a century after Machiavelli, would make a more extensive and explicit development of the fear of death and the desire of security as the foundation of political life. In the case of the British, the importance of fear of death doesn't seem a subject of discussion, as he is quite explicit about it. We know that, for example, the situation in which each person finds himself in the state of nature is terrifying and, in addition, of great insecurity. As he says, I quote, "Men live without other security than their own strength," end of quote. It will be the fear of death, especially brutal death, which will move each person to be united with the others and accept the social contract. I quote Hobbes again. The passions that incline men to peace are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living, and a hope by their industry to obtain them. End of quote.
Professor Quer, please,
yes?
Please try to conclude in the next 2 minutes, to leave 5 minutes for questions and comments.
Okay, so I will skip the rest of Hobbes. We know that that the fear of death is very important for Hobbes, and I will go directly to transhumanism. One of the main aims of transhumanism is the search for a longer or ever eternal life. We can watch this in the Transhumanist Declaration, for example, where they say humanity stands to be profoundly affected by science and technology in the future. We envision the possibility of broadening human potential by overcoming aging, cognitive shortcomings, etc., etc. So overcoming aging is the first goal of transhumanism. In other words, it is what Aubrey de Grey and other transhumanists has called ending aging. They also refer to this not only by ideas in their declarations, but also with money. They have projects like Calico, which is California Life Company, owned by Google, or the Mark Zuckerberg Chan Initiative, which is of the owner of Facebook, which have ambitious goals like controlling aging and lifespan, or manage all disease by the end of this century. These are declarations in their websites. It is clear then that when transhumanism movement and biotechnological advance, the idea of achieving a life without disease or aging is their main goal. And this is perfectly consistent with the theological inversion I mentioned and with the political philosophy of Machiavelli and Hobbes. So in short, we have been trying to overcome death since this theological inversion of modernity has been our priority. First, we tried it through political foundations, and now we're trying through biotechnological foundations. So a couple of problems that we should have on our minds about this transhumanist aim is what we would do to our human relationships and meaning of life. For example, a life of 1,000 years. How would the relationship between a father of 800 years and a son of 770 years old be? How the sense of fatherhood and being a son would be blurred. And finally, one of the greatest questions to transhumanism, it would be the inequality, the radical inequality that it could bring to our society, because what would happen is some people are transhuman and others are human, and what would happen between the difference and inequalities between them. We know that no technological advance has reached all of humanity at the same time. People in some places of our world live still in great poverty, and others don't. So we cannot be thinking that transhumanist advance would reach everyone in the same way. And we can't foresee also that all people would like to have these transhuman upgrades or enhancements. So what would this do to our political society if some people would be like enhanced and others don't? This would be one of the greatest problems that this aim of transhumanism could bring. So this would be like the final part of my presentation, so I can leave some minutes for questions or commentaries. Thank you very much.
If any of the participants have any questions. Well, in this case, I would like to address Professor Quer with a small issue. Now, expanding lifespan can be done basically in two ways, biologically and technically. Biologically, we can have drugs or genetic treatments that can expand the physical lifespan. But then again, we have this question if just expanding the lifespan of the cells of the body implicitly brings us a life of quality, because aging without rejuvenation, therefore without remaining young, is just a struggle to remain alive. Mm-hmm. Then we have the technological expansion of the lifespan, where our consciousness is downloaded into a technological device, maybe by using AI or other devices that we might have in the future, an interface between humans and machines. And this means that we will lose our biological selves. The biological self of the humans will die, the cells will decay, but our consciousness, our personalities will be downloaded into a technical device. Of course, humans have this huge fear of death because it is compliant to the fact that we have this instinct to preserve our lives, which is the basic instinct of each individual in the human species. But do you think that humanity is prepared culturally and psychologically to move beyond the limitations of millions of years of evolution, where for us, the spirit, the mind, the thoughts, the soul, and the biological are all linked together, and to make this huge culturological separation between the mind and the body?
And also, it's to move from a body to another body, biological, but from one to another.
Okay, thank you. Yes. So first of all, I would say that until today, we can't foresee the new advances of science or medical science in the future. We can't know, but for now, I'm very skeptical of the thought that we can upload or download our consciousness in other or to the cloud or then to another body. I don't think that's possible, but we will see, or maybe we won't be here, but we'll see, you know. But I am very skeptical to that idea. What I do think it's really interesting from your question, Alexandra, is what's about the meaning of life, or having a fulfilled life instead of just aiming. And that's, I think, the greatest insight of this teleological inversion is not that we before modernity we wouldn't be aiming to survive or to self-preserve our body or our life, but the idea is that now this is the main idea, or the main aim of our life is just to stay alive, instead of saying, okay, we stay alive for what? To have a life with meaning, or just to survive? Okay, and these kinds of questions, I think we should try to answer, or at least raise the questions and discussion before we have a lifespan, just say 500 years, because we don't know what that's going to do to our relationships, to the meaning of our lives. The arc of life of a life of almost 100 years, maximum 120 years old, that's mostly the longest lives we have information of. It gives you like a rainbow, it's an arc that has different moments. And if you have a life of 500 years, in what moment would you start working, stop working, have these ancient years of our lives, which are the years of wisdom, and like having an overview of our lives, and raising our grandchildren, maybe, I don't know, or just having time to spend with our family or friends, and reflect on our lives, and have gratitude. There's lots of things that are part of our human condition and our humanity that I think are valuable, and we should be trying also to reinvigorate these aspects of our life, of humanity, before we are just trying to have a life of 500 years without meaning, without the relationships that we today value so much. So I think this is the greatest problem of just aiming for a longer lifespan without thinking of the consequences and what we could lose, instead of what it's going to be only if the only gain is going to be living longer, but without this meaningful life, I think it's going to be more what we lose than what we would gain. But that's my opinion,
And by this, Professor Quer actually opens up a new whole set of discussions regarding biomoral enhancement, and the fact that some transhumanists say that unless humanity is morally prepared for these technological advancements, then humanity should not implement them. And for the last 2 minutes of this session, I would like to, I saw that Professor Antonio Sandu wants to say something in reply to Professor Quer, and I would pass along the speech to Professor Antonio Sandu to tell us in 2 minutes his reply to Professor Quer.
I don't want to give a lecture because I'm totally agree with Professor Quer. It's the most important problem is the meaning of life, not how long our life will be. But the meaning of life will also be associated with how form of life. Yes, maybe we cannot download it or upload mind or change from. There are experience of head transplant, so maybe we'll not download, but we can manage head transplant. So this will happen somewhere in time. But what will be the meaning of life, of this new kind of life, where we are no longer very deep connected with dying, as Heidegger said, we are in fear of dying. So this is the problem. How will our life be without fear of immediate dying? That's my remark. And there's not an answer, but maybe if Professor Quer wants to say something, it's a great pleasure for me to hear.
Yeah. Thank you, and I totally agree. It would be maybe the meaning of another kind of life, another form of life, which is in the same name of the philosophical movement. It would be maybe a transhuman or post-human life but it wouldn't be the human life. So in that way, maybe I think I value so much human life, or I think it's so great that that's not something that we should leave behind without any consequences, you know. So that's like the main idea that I think we should discuss before just going to a post-human condition and leaving humanity behind. Like it would be something that it's not valuable for the future.
So with this idea in mind, let's take this home with us from this first plenary session of the 15th Lumen CATES International Scientific Conference. We await for you at 1100 hours GMT +2 to be here on the next Zoom online session with plenary number 2, which will be a great plenary. We hope you will enjoy. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you, Professor Quer, for being here with us. And please stay logged on for the next sessions of this conference. Have a good day.